Excellent. Okay. Welcome everybody. Welcome to this joint session of the metadata interest group and the granularity working group and the fair data maturity model working group. First of all, I'd like to do a bit of an introduction. We have a number of different chairs and co-chairs from the different working groups with us. So we have from the metadata working group, we have Rebecca and Alex and Keith Jeffries. I think he'll be joining us shortly. And from the granularity working group, we have Raina and Brigitte and Catherine. And my name is Keith Russell, and I am one of the co-chairs of the Fair Data Maturity Model Working Group, and I am joined by my two co-chairs, Shelley and Edith. So just to give you a bit of perspective for this meeting, as we've been working on the Fair Data Maturity Model, a number of questions came up, including questions around metadata and granularity. And as we were teasing them out, we realized there was a value in having a joint meeting to spend a bit more time discussing that. I won't say much more on that because Edith's going to provide a lot more context on that. So just a few housekeeping things. There is a collaborative notes document that we'll be using during this meeting. I'll put that in the chat shortly as Edith starts her presentation. Please just add your name and email address there. We will be using that also for our breakout discussions. So first we will have a presentation by Edith about providing some background on the Fair Data Maturity Model. Then we'll have a presentation by Keith Jeffries on the metadata interest group and the work that's been happening there. Then we'll have a presentation by Katie on the data granularity working group and the work happening there. Then we will go out into two breakout rooms. The discussions in both breakout rooms will be the same, so you can just choose whichever you prefer, it doesn't matter. And in both breakout rooms, we will have discussions on both metadata and granularity, and we'll come back and wrap the discussion up together. And we'll do all the discussion note-taking, we'll do that in that collaborative notes document. So, well, thank you. And I would like to hand over to Edith and for a presentation on what the Fair Data Maturity Model Working
Group. Thank you, Keith, and welcome to everyone. I'm very happy that we could organize this co-session. I think that within RDA, the collaboration is the working method. So welcome to everyone. I'd like to ask Shelley to move the slides, please, just to say where we are with the Fair Data Maturity Model. We can go with the housekeeping because it was already introduced. Yeah, we can go to the next slide. So I'm not going to the details of the Fair Data Maturity Model working group, all details, but I'd like to say that at the end of last year in 2020 December, we achieved the status that the Fair Data Maturity output has been produced and publicly available and can be used by the communities. Although we always announced that this is not an ultimate version because FAIR is a progress and there are still many questions to be sorted out. So the RDA Fair Data Maturity Working Group, beside this output is ready, is working further in the form of maintenance working group. We can go to the next slide. Because that was what the community figured out that it's important step to do. As I said, we knew that when we closed our work that it's not ultimately closed. And we closed our working group, original working group with a survey asking the community that where do they see the urgencies to solve out. And we decided two main directions to take. So widening, deepening, and extending the Fair Data Maturity Model. When we are on the today's session, it's very much about the deepening and looking into the details, some unsolved questions or questions which can be better fine-tuned and better answered by the community. So, sorry, my dog is barking. When we are talking about widening, we are very much hoping that the Fair Data Maturity criteria will go to different continents and to different domains and to different communities for a better use. And when we are talking about extending, we think that the Fair Data Maturity criteria has to be checked in the different part of the life cycle of the data and not so much only around the data sets, which is the case today. So we decided that in the RDA 17th plenary in Edinburgh, we wish to use the opportunity to discuss and revisit some of the open questions. And the survey from the community has shown that granularity and metadata are the ones. We can go to the next slide. But I'm sure that that was my. So what? Yeah, the last slide I'd like to introduce. So. What is the sequence of our work? In 2020, we came out with the output, which was the FAIR DMM version 1. In 2021 and 22, we wish to work on all the directions and all the issues which I mentioned. And in 2022, we wish to revisit the criteria itself and come with the 2.0 version. And probably it will be the working method for a couple of years to go until we all agree that there is no need for any further improvement of the criteria itself. So this is the large picture I wanted to show you, that where we are here and how we wish to work with the community. So I'm very thankful for you to come and being with us. And we are here at the moment. I think that we are mostly in the listening mode to understand better that how we can improve the criteria by your support. Thank you so much. And I'd like to hand the phone. I'd like to give the floor to Keith Jeffrey, who will speak next. Thank you.
And thank you, Shelley, for putting up the slides. I trust everyone can hear me. I'll now go through the slides one at a time. So I'm representing MIG, Metadata Interest Group, which also has a working group and also incorporates the Data in Context Interest Group. My co-chairs, Alex Ball, is in this call, and Rebecca Koskela is looking after a parallel meeting to this one. Next slide, please. So, first question, what is granularity? Well, dealing just with data at the moment, I think it's things like you see in the left-hand column, where you can break it down in various ways, such as in a domain or in a collection or whatever. But in fact, if you look at the right-hand column, in practice and in process, it's further granulated by a whole lot of other things, which are normally metadata attributes of a digital object of some kind, and which can be used to select appropriate digital objects for the purpose at hand. And the important thing, of course, from a metadata point of view, is the richness of that metadata. Next slide, please. So what I will argue is that the granularities that were on the left side of the previous slide are somewhat artificial. They're human-imposed granularities rather than the natural or real-world granularity of the data. And therefore, we have to find a better way of dealing with granularity that is dynamic and which reflects the real world. Next slide, please. So what I would like to argue is that you take a granule on the left side, and then we have to ask questions about that granule in order to metadata document it. Questions like where, when, and what, and how, who, and why. And if we have the answers to those things, then what we can do is achieve fairness by populating the things on the right, the description, the context, the provenance, and the curation. In other words, the things we need to ensure that the digital object of interest is described, characterized, represented in an appropriate way for all the things we want to do, like discovery, like access, like interoperation, and reuse. And let me repeat, it's not just the idea of data, although that's what the Fair Data Maturity Working Group was doing mainly, but we have to also consider software or digital objects representing facilities, equipment, publications, institutions, persons, and how all these link together. So my argument is it's all a graph of objects and relationships, where the graph has to be a rich knowledge property graph, so that the relationships between all these different entities or objects are represented with rich semantics. Next slide, please, Shelley. So here's an example. Relationship between any two granules can be things like is part of, is copy of, and so on. But we also need the relationships of each of those granules to the process that was used to generate it, persons, organizations, license. I mean, I don't need to go on. It's a huge universe, connected graph of information. And let me state again, the relationships are very rich. And also, you'll notice at the bottom of this slide in red, I add time interval because that's critically important for provenance. That tells you the time interval during which the assertion of the relationship between the objects is true. And secondly, you may wish to add modal logic, i.e. probability. After all, most science is based on probabilities. We have hypotheses that turn into theories that turn into, quote, laws, unquote, if you think of physics, for example. And so we need to be able to follow that mechanism in dealing with these granules. Next slide, please, Shelley. So the mechanisms to manage to achieve and record these relationships and to deal with granularity, I believe, are on the left. Metadata with formal syntax, which implies referential and functional integrity, and declared semantics, which implies an ontology, and we have to deal with multilinguality. Too much of the material is in the International Language of Science, which is a sort of American English. But we have to be able to deal with multilinguality. There's vast amounts of research data, especially concerning culture, language, and so on, in local national languages, and we need to be able to deal with that. And of course, we have to deal with what's in red at bottom left, all the access restrictions of various kinds. If you're interested more in this area and how you can use advanced, rich metadata to deal with granularity and to link with fairness, and therefore the fairness data model maturity group, then there's the contacts for the metadata interest group, the metadata principles as accepted by RDA, and the elements, that is the suggested canonical set of metadata elements that is currently work in progress. And let me stress, the elements are not attributes. Each element is a complex object itself. So it's not just simple attributes. These are not columns on a punched card. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much indeed.
So now I'm going to, have we transitioned to the Granularity Working Group. So everybody, thank you for coming to this joint meeting. And I'm going to present just a brief overview on the process that we're going through with the Data Granularity Working Group. In contrast with maybe what you just heard from the Metadata Group, we're not putting forth a particular framework or proposal, but rather at this point using a bit more of an inductive approach to try to understand, identify what are the most challenging and pressing questions in data granularity and what the working group should be working on. If you go to the next slide. So granularity is a concept that, as we've just heard, relates closely to metadata, but also impacts an array of aspects across data infrastructure, from discovery to access, interoperability, analysis, citation, and many more. And this particular group grew out of the discovery angle through the data discovery paradigms interest group, but is really intended to not be focused specifically on discovery, but to look at granularity as an approach to look at the various different aspects of research data infrastructure and how granularity keeps popping up as an important issue in those, including in the FAIR model. It cropped up as an important issue, and that's where we're happy to be engaged. And we're really committed as a working group to leverage and engage with the groups that are on this call and other ones to try to understand what is already known and understood about granularity and what to bring in. So when we talk about granularity, and I think that Keith just covered some of this, sometimes we're talking about different levels of aggregation of data sets. Sometimes it might be a different kind of object that was used in data collection, whether it be a data source, you can do aggregations on time or geography. And in general, the importance of granularity is that different users in the process, whether they be data creators, repository managers, or end researchers, will have needs and value that can be brought up by being able to, in the infrastructure, work with data deliberately at different levels of granularity. We know that's a need, but we don't quite have as much of a process to be able to look at the big picture of that as we'd like. And as I said, as at the bottom, it's closely intertwined with FAIR, because there are a lot of challenges in order to make data fair that circulates around what is done at different levels of granularity. So now you can go to the next slide. So our mission and where we are in our status is we are a working group not yet endorsed. So we have put out a draft case statement that we're iterating as a group. And the main goals outlined in that case statement are to, again, not, as I mentioned before, not to put forth a particular model, but rather to ask a lot of important questions and share information about, of all the things involved in data granularity, what are the key and most important pressing questions for people who are working on this? As I mentioned before, to really build upon and complement the existing and ongoing work of RDA, given the fact that granularity is so intertwined with all of these, we really want to work in a collaborative way, not just to go off and do something in isolation. And that what we would end up producing is a set of use cases and a guidance document, not on what granularity should be used, but the approach that organizations and different kinds of stakeholders take in making granularity choices and in choosing what kinds of levels of granularity to support, how, and trying to build a common terminology around having those discussions. So again, where we are in the status is that we are in the endorsement process. We really welcome initial and ongoing feedback on what we could be doing as a group, and hope to be able to start our formal launch late in the spring. And I really look forward to using one of our main goals for this joint session is to be able to have a broader perspective on our potential work to guide the beginning of this new work. And then those are, I just sent Shelley along the discussion questions for later, but we don't need to start talking about them now. I'll defer back to you on the transition.
Okay, great. Thank you, Katie. So the way we thought we'd set up this session, rather than trying to do a plenary discussion with everybody in the room, which is probably a bit too much, we thought we'd break up into two parallel groups that discuss the same questions. Because the same questions are going to be discussed in the same groups, in the different groups, it doesn't matter which group you go into. So possibly a good way to divvy up to make sure we have a bit of an even spread is everybody with a first name that starts with A to K goes into group A, and everybody that goes in with a first name that goes from L to Z goes into group B. Maybe that's a good way to do it. We have divvied up the presenters and the representatives from the different working groups and interest groups, so that there should be representatives from both in both groups. So in the collaborative notes document, you'll find a number of questions which we'd like to discuss in these breakout groups. And we still have 1 hour and 10 minutes left in this session. So I think we'll probably reserve most of that time for those breakout discussions and then come back for the last 20 minutes, which means 50 minutes from now. So 10 to, well, depends on what time you're in, I guess, but for me, 10 to 12, for you, 10 to whatever, we will come back here into that plenary room. Does that sound like a good approach? Okay, great. Any questions on that process, or is that all clear? Okay, great. Well, then in that case, please find your respective breakout room, and we will see you there, and we'll continue the discussion there, and we'll see you back here for the plenary discussion at 10 to the hour. Thank you.
Keith, can you remind me where I go?
Yes. What was the divvying again? I think think you went into the second one with me, and Edith went into the first one.
Okay, great.
Yeah, see you.
Hi, Shelley. Sorry.
Hi, Yolanda. Thanks for keeping the house warm while we were gone.
Sure. You're good.
I feel like we got double time on this session. I can't believe we still have 23 minutes left. What did we do right?
Sometimes it does work. So, yes.
Yeah. Hey, Katie.
I would say we kept our presentation short to allow time for discussion.
Is that what it was? I must tell you, I have to also get more coffee.
I realize this is a dig at our presentations yesterday, which were just overrunning and overrunning. I'm so sorry about that.
That's the danger, yeah. So what shall we do? Shall we do breakout A, reporting back on metadata, breakout B, reporting back on metadata, and then breakout A on granularity, breakout B on granularity? That might be a good flow. Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah, cool. In that case, I would like to hand over to the designated reporter, because I'm sure in breakout group A you were completely organized and you've already established a designated reporter to report back on your discussions on the metadata side of things first, and then we'll switch to group B to talk about what was discussed there around metadata. So, Edith, I think you were in breakout group A. So, who will be reporting back on the discussion around metadata?
Absolutely. We didn't nominate the reporter back, but I think that we know who can report it back. So I'd like to use the opportunity to invite Katarina, Jenra, and Alex to report back on the metadata and on the granularity. What we learned from the RDA, the FDMM point of view, that we need a multi-disciplinary use cases, and to learn from the practical cases better than just to discuss the issue in theory. So that was the learning point for us, that we so far have only single domain experience with the FDMM model, and we have to push for multi-domain use cases and learn from them. So I'd like to ask Katarina and maybe Axel to report back on the metadata and the granularity. Thank you.
Well, if you could just focus on the metadata side for now, we'll get to the granularity later.
I'll trust that Alex will have something to say, but my comment, what you said notwithstanding, is that I was surprised how granularity popped up in the metadata conversation even before we moved to the granularity conversation, which I think Keith's sort of presentation before mine demonstrated that as well. And so that was a theme I want to report out on.
Are you here? And would you be able to summarize? You can use the fair data. You can use the Google Doc as a support tool, and everyone can read it as well.
Well, that is the reason I was typing furiously into it. Yes, so I think we had some suggestions, but I think we came to a decision very early on in the discussion that the richness and the robustness were. There weren't something that you can express in a kind of one-size-fits-all way. It's all very highly dependent on use cases, and it is very strongly determined by what the community standards are. I mean, the community standard does say what it considers to be rich enough for a given use case, but that it's not just the domain-specific use cases that we need to consider. We also need to think about working across domains, interoperating between domains, and these use cases will have different requirements, which means there'll be different items of metadata that are more or less useful for those different use cases, and that will affect a judgment on whether any particular set of metadata is rich or robust enough. We had quite often we had more questions than answers, but another question that we had is where would be the right place to hold metadata for a particular granule? What's a way of arranging it so that it's maintained in the right place in the right way, and is enables interoperation between metadata specific tools. We were interested from one of the use cases we delved into in more detail was the use case of a data discovery service. We had Heinrich from UDA, and thinking about what's the because the data discovery service is trying to have a kind of consistent view on the data sets that are available across a whole different set of domains, and thinking about what is the most appropriate level to present that information, and therefore what is the most appropriate granularity at which to harvest the metadata about those data sets. And Francois suggested that trying to just pick just one might not be enough, and maybe you do need to think about harvesting metadata at several different levels, and kind of nominate a collection level or an item level, or maybe a third one as well. And we just discussed more about the points in Keith's slide about the different ways in which you can carve up granularity, or indeed how you can build it up, and therefore considering which are strict hierarchies of granularity, and which are sort of more fuzzy, where a single item can be in more than one high level granule, and what the impacts are there for managing the associated metadata.
Thank you, Alex. Yeah, we give the floor back to Keith, and I think that I think it was George who said that actually, if you answer the question 2 and 3, we get the answer to question 1. Simple like that.
Thanks, Edith. On the metadata discussion, Shelley, who would like to report back from Group B?
I feel like maybe Keith should. Keith, are you here? You want to give it do you want to kind of give a very short summary? Oh, laughing. Oh, funny. You mean me picking the expert to give the summary? I'm not stupid. I don't know if Keith is still with us, Keith Jeffrey, but what he did is he walked through some of the groundwork that's been laid oh, here you go. Okay. Well, wait, come back.
Sorry, I was keeping out of the conversation until, you'd like me to report back on what we discussed about metadata.
Just metadata, just briefly.
Basically, it was a kind of rerun of the talk I did in the plenary anyway. Basically, we discussed how metadata relates to granularity, and it swiftly, as has been said by Edith, it became a convolution of granularity and metadata, because the two are intimately related. What we did talk about was I was proposing that the current ideas of granularity are administrative or managerial rather than reflecting the real world, things like collections and files and so on, and that we had to deal more dynamically with granularity in terms of the process. We then got into an interesting discussion about how repositories should respond to granularity and how repositories should respond to queries. I mean, should they just provide download, or should they provide local processing, at least data management processing, to reduce the size of data set only to the granular parts of it that are required for the query or the operation that the end user is trying to do. We discussed richness and robustness. Richness, well, the metadata principles from Force 11 for FAIR say that you need a plethora of attributes, and that's clearly a good definition for richness. Robustness, we discussed that quite a bit, and it seems to do mainly with curation and provenance, and within curation preservation, how you make sure that the stuff is there, and that it is somehow by the metadata characterized so it can be the appropriate relevance and quality for the purpose to which it's being put. Stop.
Very nice. Thank you so much. Back over to Edith.
To me?
I think it's time for us to move on to our outbriefs of granularity.
Oh, absolutely. It's easy for me. I just pass the floor to our granularity experts, Kathleen and Chandra.
I wonder, Raina, would you like to have a go at this one?
Right.
I'm happy for you to do it.
Well, I'll give a start because you had a lot of great things to say. So I want to not just be a translator. So I think, let me make sure I'm looking at the right group's notes. I mean, one of the things that came out, which I think is valuable for us, is just a question around when we had asked for feedback on the planned process of the working group. People asked for more details about what our planned process is, and even though we do have that in the case statement, it is somewhat deliberately vague because we're trying to surface, I think, important questions before we sort of propose something specific. But I understand that can be sort of a little bit tricky to respond to. So I think as we start to do our work and say, develop our use cases, we'll want to balance that open-ended nature with specificity. So we don't just say, so tell us what you think about granularity. We sort of start with something more concrete. So I think that's a good learning from our group. And then in terms of granularity, you had a lot of interesting things to say, I think, about how you're thinking about the relationships between, granularity sometimes is about relationships and relationships between different, as I said, sort of levels of aggregation, but yet it's not necessarily always a hierarchical relationship. And you were speaking about that even within, it's not necessarily hierarchical, and there isn't necessarily consistency within a discipline. So those are some of the main themes that I heard.
Raina, did you have anything to add before we hop over to Brigitte?
I think I'm just trying to remember if there's anything else really key, but you can head over to Brigitte.
Oh my gosh, I've been saying her name wrong. Brigitte. I'm sorry. I apologize.
It's okay. You're both wrong.
Oh no.
No, don't worry about it. So yeah, it's you just however you like.
Now you have to say it. The metadata has to get corrected.
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. Yeah, maybe we all be a bit courageous about leaving the not as accurate metadata there. No, it's Brigitte. It's German pronunciation. I'm sorry.
Brigitte.
Brigitte, yes.
Brigitte. Okay. I'm turning my microphone off.
Just stick with Bridget. Okay, so yeah, so I was worried that you would say that, and I was trying to read up on the notes. And one of the things that we discussed was whether or not like the different purposes that granularity has for different people, different communities, and different use cases. Like, do you want to reuse? Do you want to discover? Do you want to assess the data? And also the observation that right now a lot of the granularity is dictated by arbitrary administrative choices. Like it's the stuff that happens to be in that file, and so that's the granule now. So that there's a certain mismatch. And then there's a thing about that just, you know, breaking everything down to the lowest level is also not really practical, because the lowest level doesn't have a lot of metadata, and there's also other disadvantages, and it doesn't fit all the use cases. There was a point that I believe I made, and then there is the issue of when you just want to not look at all the data of a certain granule, but only a part of it. And then, of course, things can get immensely, infinitively complex at this point, because you're versioning, you have data citation, you have all these standard things, and we all realize that there are no like perfect solutions right now for that. But there, for example, through federated through objects, you have, you know, like there are ideas on the horizon that would facilitate at least some of these issues. Then we talked a bit about how to store queries and scripts, which is, of course, something that is also, you know, when you talk about data, talking about computational sort of to scripts and code is always not so far behind, because this is ultimately what you're probably want to do with the data. But then, of course, the question is, how do you give credit? How do you cite? What are the current recommendations? The data citation group has made some very good recommendations for dynamic citations. Yeah. So. Then Mustafa also talked about how different communities have different requirements when it comes to the granules, like different granularity levels. And that, of course, is an obstacle to interoperability. I think that's very valid. And I can observe that even in my own domain between communities. I mean, when we talk about communities, you always get the image of like biologists and doctors or whatever, but you know, in my community, we're talking about family sociologists and relationship sociologists. They already have different ideas on how to do that, and you would probably think they'd be basically the same group of people. So this is actually, I think, something that's very valid there. And and I asked everyone to share their stories and use cases with the group, also to join the Granularity group if you're interested. I got some feedback for that as well. So thank you very much. And I'll look into it. I already read part of the document. It was quite interesting how similar that was to some of the thoughts that we already had. So we didn't copy it down. It was, you know, great minds think alike sort of situation.
I really appreciated all of the discussion, and as each of you were speaking, there was one thing that came up in my mind from yesterday's Cure Fair working group meeting. I don't know if members of that group are here, but they're focusing on what does it mean to package together everything that creates a reproducible package. So all of a sudden you're mixing data with software, with workflow, with whatever it took. And then, you know, if you're citing that package, then maybe reusing just the software or reusing just the data. What does that mean exactly? So I will bring that use case to your group. So,
thank you.
that one is getting more common. Executable environments, CodeOcean, notebooks, they're all mashing it together, and it's really, really hard to keep credit working and reuse of different elements figured out. So just more to do.
Yeah, I think that the problem of credit is really one that is just very, very difficult, because I mean I don't even know how long it took for book science to have a citation index. I think it was thousands of years. So
Well, and trying not to have data have an index, right? Like, no, that's not how we think about it.
Yeah, so the more I work with data, the more I feel like the data is kind of like a book metaphor, which a lot of us use, is sort of, in many ways, it's not really good. And we should try to rethink that, because for example, with books, you have like automatic granularity, and with data, that doesn't exist like at all.
That's really interesting. Deb Agarwal used that concept of a book when we were talking about the DOI collection, which is another challenging entity, and I wonder if that's possible. Anyway, we're at 3 minutes. Keith, do you wanna wind us up? Or wrap us up?
Yeah, yes. Well, I can really wind you up. When we're talking about metaphors for data, let's not talk about it as a book anymore, but as a flowing river. And imagine trying to cite a flowing river, or try to reference a flowing river as it flows past. Yes. Anyway, that's really to do your head in. No, sorry. I hope this was a useful discussion. I hope you found this very useful. I definitely recommend for all those that were interested in these conversations, joining the metadata interest group, and especially the very new granularity working group, and providing use cases and examples to them. I think this has provided some really interesting thoughts and perspectives there. So I'd like to first of all, I'd like to really thank Alex Ball and Keith Jeffries for coming to this and providing their thoughts, and Keith for the wonderful presentation, and that trigger and the connection between the metadata and the granularity and how those two relate. And I'd also really like to thank the Granularity Working Group for coming, so Raina, Brigitte, and Catherine. So I think for me it was a really interesting discussion in trying to dig deeper into what is the underlying issue there, and why is it not so easy to solve. So yes, that's it from me. Shelley, Edith, do you have anything to add?
Is there anything we can do to help the Granularity Working Group get their endorsement? Is there something you need us to do?
Please join, especially if you're not from America or Europe.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
Because we one of the criticisms that we got was that our membership is not diverse enough, which is completely valid. If you are not from North America or Europe, then please consider joining.
But if you are from those countries, just forget it.
No. But I'm pretty pleased. But if you are from North America or Europe and you're interested in the group, then please join as well.
I would, in addition to that, I have two other ideas, one small and one larger. The small one is our case statement is on the draft one is on the website, and actually I'm pausing as I'm saying this. I assume that you, even though it's formally past community review, I believe that you all, sorry, I just leaned on my keyboard and sent a hyphen, that you all can still post comments, constructive criticism, which we still welcome on an ongoing basis, and also what you think would be valuable from it. And then the other bigger picture thing is, if I don't remember if you or if anybody else on the call is part of an RDA organizational member, but that's something, that we've heard, is that being able to include in a revised version of the case statement, statements from RDA organizational members that say, this is how we might use the outputs from this group. And actually, in having you or anybody else think about that is actually a good test for us. That if you come upon the point, it's either you will either say, this is great, we'll use this, but you may find gaps, and that would be useful for us to know.
Yep, I know that Amy Nürnberger and I are both on the OAB, and we both are very excited about this working group. So I can see use. I mean, you guys know I'm really fan, so I'll be happy to provide a very official. I am the I at the end of this month I become the co-chair of the organizational assembly. So yeah, I'm very happy to provide a statement that's supportive.
That would be great. Thank you.
I can say that when it arrives to the council, first you have to pass the tab. I will be a promoter because I understood from the two-day discussion and from the previous ones that the granularity is a big challenge to cross also for the interoperability. And I think that if you wish to improve your case statement, you very much have to go for a multi-domain approach to figure out that where the challenge is lays down between the different domains. And something was said in our group A that maybe the guidance on the granularity between domains would be the useful step to do. So I don't know if it's in the objectives of the working group, but maybe you can put. And as a final say from you, I think that it was the good experience to meet and discuss those subjects. But I definitely feel that the personal interconnections to find the feedback from the users, the real users, just to talk to them on the corridors on the plenary, it cannot be replaced by the virtual meeting. Yeah? So I hope to see you soon in face-to-face somewhere sometimes.
I'm giving you all a link to the case statement so that you can put it into one of your tabs for perusing while you're having coffee or tea. If you could go ahead and take a look and lend your thinking. All right. Okay, Granularity, make it. We need you.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you all again, and I hope you have a lovely day, evening, afternoon, wherever you are at this point in time. Okay,
I think there's music lessons right now, so please go listen to the dancing and music.
Thanks, everybody. Bye now.
See you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Mustafa.